When 19-year-old Elvis Presley walked out of the Grand Ole Opry on October 2nd, 1954, he wasn't crying. He was too numb for tears. The man at the door, Denny, the Opry's talent manager, had just looked him straight in the eye and said the words that would haunt Elvis for the rest of his life. "You ain't going nowhere, son. You ought to go back to driving a truck." Those words should have ended everything. They should have crushed a poor kid from Tupelo who was already barely holding on. But what happened in the weeks after that rejection would prove something nobody at the Grand Ole Opry understood. Sometimes the people who tell you that you'll never make it are the exact people you need to prove wrong. And Elvis Presley was about to prove them all wrong in a way that would change music history forever. Memphis, Tennessee, September 1954. Elvis Aaron Presley was 19 years old and working full-time as a truck driver for Crown Electric Company. He made $35 a week hauling electrical supplies across the city, and most nights he came home covered in dust and grease, too tired to do anything but collapse on his bed in the tiny apartment he shared with his parents, Vernon and Gladys. They were still poor, still struggling, still living paycheck to paycheck like they'd done his entire life. But Elvis had a secret dream. A dream he barely talked about because it seemed too impossible, too ridiculous for a kid like him. He wanted to be a singer, not just any singer. He wanted to be someone. He wanted to make music that mattered. He wanted to stand on stage and feel what he felt when he listened to gospel music at church or blues music on Beale Street. He wanted to touch people's souls the way those songs touched his. The problem was, nobody seemed to think he was good enough. Earlier that summer, in July, something had happened that gave Elvis a flicker of hope. He'd walked into Sun's studio, a small recording studio on Union Avenue run by a man named Sam Phillips. Elvis had paid $4 to record 2 songs as a gift for his mother's birthday, "My Happiness" and "That's When Your Heartaches Begin." Sam Phillips's assistant, Marion Keisker, had been there that day, and something about Elvis's voice caught her attention. She made a note: "Good ballad singer, hold." A few weeks later, Sam Phillips called Elvis back to the studio. He wanted to try recording him properly, see if this kid had something. They spent hours trying different songs, different styles, different approaches. Elvis was nervous, awkward, unsure of himself. And then, during a break, almost as a joke, Elvis started playing around with an old blues song called "That's All Right." The sound that came out was different, raw, energetic, a fusion of country and blues and gospel that nobody had quite heard before. Sam Phillips knew immediately he had something special. Within days, "That's All Right" was playing on Memphis radio stations. People were calling in, asking who this singer was, where they could hear more. Elvis Presley suddenly had a local hit, a real, actual hit. For the first time in his life, people were paying attention. But having one local hit wasn't enough. Elvis needed to reach a bigger audience. He needed legitimacy. He needed the kind of platform that could launch a real career. And in 1954, for a country and gospel singer, there was only one place that mattered: the Grand Ole Opry. The Grand Ole Opry was the holy grail of country music. Broadcast live every Saturday night from the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, Tennessee, the Opry reached millions of listeners across America. Performing on the Opry meant you'd made it. It meant you were legitimate. It meant you were part of country music royalty. Elvis wanted that more than anything. His manager at the time, not Colonel Parker yet, just a local promoter named Bob Neal, managed to get Elvis an audition slot for the Opry. It wasn't easy. The Opry was selective, prestigious, and deeply traditional. They didn't just let anyone walk on that stage. But Bob Neal was persistent, and Elvis's local success in Memphis was enough to get him in the door. October 2nd, 1954. Elvis, his parents Vernon and Gladys, and his guitar player Scotty Moore made the 3-hour drive from Memphis to Nashville in Elvis's beat-up old car. Elvis was so nervous he could barely speak. He'd worn his best clothes, a pair of dress pants, a jacket. His hair slicked back with pomade the way he always did. Gladys kept telling him he looked handsome, that he was going to do great, that the Opry people would love him. But Elvis couldn't shake the fear that he wasn't good enough. The Ryman Auditorium was intimidating, old, grand, filled with history. Legends had performed on that stage. Hank Williams, Roy Acuff, Ernest Tubb, and now Elvis Presley, a 19-year-old truck driver from Memphis, was supposed to walk out there and prove he belonged. But wait, I need to tell you something important, something nobody talks about. Elvis didn't just walk into the Opry that night full of confidence. He walked in carrying a lifetime of rejection, poverty, and self-doubt that had been building since childhood. Elvis had grown up dirt poor in Tupelo, Mississippi. His family lived in a 2-room shotgun shack with no electricity, no running water, and barely enough food. His twin brother, Jesse Garin, was stillborn, and Elvis grew up feeling like he was living for 2 people, himself and the brother he never got to know. The weight of survivor's guilt mixed with poverty shaped him into a shy, sensitive kid who never quite felt like he fit in anywhere. When the Presley family moved to Memphis in 1948, things didn't get much better. They lived in public housing projects. Vernon struggled to find steady work. Gladys cleaned houses and worked factory jobs. Elvis got bullied at school for being poor, for dressing different, for singing in the hallways. He was called trashy, weird, a mama's boy. The only place he felt safe was with his guitar, singing songs to himself when nobody was listening. And now, here he was, standing backstage at the Grand Ole Opry, about to step into the biggest moment of his young life. And he was terrified. "You're gonna do great, son," Scotty Moore said, adjusting his guitar strap. Scotty was older, more experienced, and he'd been playing with Elvis for a few months now. He believed in the kid, even when Elvis didn't believe in himself. "What if they hate it?" Elvis whispered. His hands were shaking. "What if they think I'm just nothing?" Gladys squeezed his hand. "Baby, you got a gift from God. Don't you forget that. You get out there and you sing like you always do, and they'll see what I see." Elvis nodded, but the fear didn't go away. The Opry stage manager called his name. It was time. Elvis walked out onto the Ryman stage, guitar in hand, Scotty Moore behind him. The audience, hundreds of people dressed in their Saturday best, stared at him with polite curiosity. Elvis stood at the microphone, and for a moment, he froze. The lights were bright. The silence was deafening. He could feel every pair of eyes on him, judging him, waiting for him to prove he belonged. He opened his mouth and started singing "Blue Moon of Kentucky," the song that had been getting good reactions in Memphis. But something was different tonight. Something was wrong. The audience sat still, unmoving, their faces blank. No applause during the instrumental breaks. No cheers, no energy. Just polite, cold silence. Elvis's voice wavered. He could feel it. They didn't like him. They didn't get it. The sound that had made people go crazy in Memphis clubs, the fusion of country and blues and something entirely new, just sounded wrong here, out of place, like he didn't belong. When the song ended, there was scattered, polite applause. The kind of applause you give someone out of obligation, not enthusiasm. Elvis walked off stage knowing he'd failed. He'd had his one shot at the Grand Ole Opry, and he'd blown it. But here's the thing. Nobody tells you about that night. It wasn't just the performance that crushed Elvis. It was what happened after. Jim Denny, the Opry's talent manager, was waiting backstage. He was a powerful man in country music. The gatekeeper who decided who got invited back, who got a regular spot, who got to build a career on the Opry's stage. Elvis approached him, hoping for feedback, hoping for encouragement, hoping for anything that might salvage the night. Jim Denny looked at Elvis with barely concealed contempt. "Son, you ain't going nowhere," Denny said. His voice was flat, dismissive, like he was stating an obvious fact. "That music you're doing, it don't fit here. It ain't country. It ain't gospel. I don't even know what it is. My advice to you, go back to Memphis and go back to driving a truck. That's where you belong." The words hit Elvis like a physical blow. He stood there, frozen, unable to respond. Scotty Moore tried to argue, tried to defend Elvis, but Denny had already turned away. The conversation was over. Elvis Presley was dismissed. The drive back to Memphis was silent. Vernon tried to make small talk about the scenery. Scotty tried to tell Elvis that Jim Denny was an idiot who didn't know talent when he heard it. But Elvis just stared out the window, replaying Denny's words over and over in his head. "You ain't going nowhere. Go back to driving a truck. That's where you belong." When they got home, Elvis went straight to his room and closed the door. Gladys wanted to comfort him, but Vernon told her to let him be. They could hear him in there, not crying, just sitting in silence, for hours. But here's what you need to understand about what happened next. This is where the real story begins. Because what Jim Denny didn't know, what the Grand Ole Opry didn't know, was that rejection was about to become Elvis's greatest fuel. The next morning, Elvis woke up and went to work at Crown Electric like always. His alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., same as every day. He dragged himself out of bed, his body heavy with exhaustion. Not just physical exhaustion from the long drive back from Nashville, but the emotional exhaustion of having your dreams crushed. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, and for a moment, he barely recognized the person staring back. Was Jim Denny right? Was he just a nobody truck driver who'd been foolish enough to think he could be something more? Gladys was already in the kitchen making breakfast. She looked up when Elvis walked in, her eyes searching his face for signs of how he was holding up. She didn't say anything about Nashville. She didn't need to. The pain was written all over her son's face. "You eat something, baby," she said softly, putting a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of him. "You got a long day ahead." Elvis picked at his food, not really tasting it. His mind was replaying the night before on an endless loop. The cold silence of the Opry audience, the contemptuous look on Jim Denny's face, the words that kept echoing, "You ain't going nowhere." He drove his truck through Memphis that day, delivering supplies, doing his job. But something inside him had shifted. The hurt was still there, sharp and raw, like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. But underneath it was something else, something growing with every mile he drove. Anger. Not destructive anger, focused anger. The kind that makes you work harder, push further, refuse to quit. At lunch break, Elvis sat in his truck and pulled out a piece of paper. He started writing down every negative thing anyone had ever said to him. "You're too poor. You're too weird. You'll never amount to anything. Stick to driving trucks." The list grew longer, and with each word, something crystallized inside him. These people, all of them, were wrong. They had to be wrong. Because if they were right, if he really was just a nobody going nowhere, then what was the point of anything? By the time his shift ended at Crown Electric, Elvis had made a decision. He wasn't going to let Jim Denny's words define him. He wasn't going to let one rejection at the Grand Ole Opry be the end of his story. He was going to prove them wrong. All of them, every single person who'd ever doubted him, dismissed him, told him he wasn't good enough. He was going to prove them so spectacularly wrong that they'd never forget it. That night, Elvis went to a small club on Beale Street, where he sometimes performed. The venue was called the Flamingo Room, a cramped, smoky dive bar that smelled like beer and cigarettes and desperation. The kind of place where broken dreams went to die, or where new dreams went to be born. Tonight, it would be the latter. The crowd was tiny, maybe 30 people, most of them black blues musicians and music lovers who frequented the clubs on Beale Street. This was Elvis's other world. The world his white peers from his high school days didn't understand. While other white teenagers in Memphis stayed in their segregated neighborhoods, Elvis had always been drawn to Beale Street, to the raw emotion and power of blues music, to the authenticity he never found anywhere else. He walked on stage at 10 p.m. No introduction, no fanfare. Just Elvis with his guitar, stepping up to a scratched microphone in a corner of the bar. The usual crowd barely looked up at first. They'd seen plenty of young white boys come through trying to play blues. Most of them were terrible, trying too hard to imitate something they didn't really understand. But when Elvis opened his mouth and started singing, "That's All Right," something in the room shifted. His voice was different tonight. Raw, urgent, like he was singing to save his own life. He wasn't performing, he was exorcising demons. Every word he sang was aimed at Jim Denny, at the Grand Ole Opry, at everyone who'd ever told him he wasn't good enough. He sang "Blue Moon of Kentucky" next, but not the polite, restrained version he'd done at the Opry. This version was wild, uninhibited, electric. His hips moved without him thinking about it. His voice cracked and soared and growled. His legs shook uncontrollably, that nervous tick that would later become his trademark. The guitar felt like a weapon in his hands, and every chord was a declaration of war against doubt. The audience went wild. They cheered, they danced, they demanded encores. People who'd been sitting at tables ignoring him were now on their feet, clapping, shouting his name. The bartender turned down the jukebox. Other musicians who'd been playing pool in the back room came forward to watch. By the time Elvis finished his set at midnight, the tiny club was packed. Word had spread on the street that something special was happening at the Flamingo Room. After the show, an older blues musician named B.B. King, yes, that B.B. King, who was already well known on Beale Street, came up to Elvis. They'd met a few times before. B.B. had always been kind to the young white kid who loved blues music and didn't act like he was better than everyone else. "Man, I don't know what happened to you," B.B. said, studying Elvis's face. "But you're different tonight. You're on fire. That was angry music, but it was good angry. Focused. Where's that coming from?" Elvis just nodded, his hands still shaking from adrenaline. "Got rejected yesterday. Grand Ole Opry. They told me I'd never make it. Told me to go back to driving trucks." B.B. let out a low whistle. "The Opry, huh? Those old cats don't know what's coming. They're still living in the past, playing the same old songs for the same old people. But you," B.B. pointed at Elvis's chest, "you're the future, man, and the future scares people, especially people who got comfortable in the past." Those words hit Elvis harder than he expected. B.B. King, a real musician, someone Elvis respected deeply, saw something in him that the Grand Ole Opry couldn't see. And more importantly, B.B. understood why they couldn't see it. It wasn't about talent. It was about vision. About being so new, so different, that the establishment couldn't process it. Elvis performed at the Flamingo Room 3 more times that week. And every night, the crowd grew larger. By Friday, there were over 100 people crammed into a space meant for 30. The club owner, a man named Clifford, had to start charging a cover just to control the crowds. And every night, Elvis sang like his life depended on it. Because, in a way, it did. Over the next few weeks, Elvis performed everywhere he could. High school gyms, small clubs, radio station appearances, any stage that would have him. And everywhere he went, the reaction was the same. Young people went absolutely crazy for his music. They'd never heard anything like it. The way he moved, the way he sang, the raw energy and sexuality and rebellion in every note. Bob Neal started getting calls from other promoters. Bigger venues wanted Elvis. Radio stations wanted to play his music. Something was building, and it was happening fast. Then, in early 1955, a man named Colonel Tom Parker heard about this kid from Memphis who was causing a sensation with teenagers. Parker was a shrewd, calculating music manager who saw dollar signs in Elvis's potential. He started attending Elvis's shows, watching the way crowds reacted, calculating how to turn this raw talent into a money-making machine. By mid-1955, Elvis had signed with RCA Records, a major label deal that Sam Phillips negotiated, selling Elvis's contract for $35,000, an astronomical sum at the time. Elvis was no longer a local Memphis phenomenon. He was becoming a national sensation. And then came 1956, the year everything exploded. January 1956. Elvis appears on national television for the first time, performing on Stage Show. Teenagers across America lose their minds. April 1956. Heartbreak Hotel hits #1 on the Billboard charts. Elvis Presley is officially a star. September 1956. Elvis appears on The Ed Sullivan Show. 70 million people watch, 60% of the entire American population at the time. The performance is so controversial, so provocative, that they film him from the waist up, only because his hip movements are considered too obscene for television. By the end of 1956, Elvis Presley was the biggest star in the world. He'd sold millions of records. He'd appeared in his first movie. He'd changed the face of popular music forever. And Jim Denny? The man who'd told Elvis to go back to driving trucks? He watched from the sidelines as the kid he'd dismissed conquered the world. Years later, Denny would admit in interviews that rejecting Elvis Presley was the biggest mistake of his career. But by then, it didn't matter. Elvis had already proven him wrong in the most spectacular way possible. But here's the deeper truth that nobody talks about. The Grand Ole Opry rejection didn't just fuel Elvis's ambition. It shaped his entire relationship with success, with fame, with proving himself. For the rest of his life, Elvis carried those words, "You ain't going nowhere," like a scar. Even when he was the biggest star on the planet, even when he was selling out arenas and making millions of dollars, part of him never stopped trying to prove Jim Denny wrong. In 1973, nearly 20 years after that rejection, Elvis was asked in an interview about the hardest moment of his career. Without hesitation, he talked about the Grand Ole Opry. That night, Elvis said, "I thought my dream was over. I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I should just give up and be realistic. But then I realized something. The people who tell you that you can't do something are usually the people who never tried. And I refuse to let someone else's limitations become my reality." That's the real lesson of Elvis's rejection story. It's not just about perseverance or proving people wrong. It's about understanding that rejection says more about the person rejecting you than it does about you. Jim Denny couldn't see Elvis's potential because Denny was trapped in his own narrow vision of what country music should be. He was looking for more Hank Williams, more Ernest Tubb, more of the same. He couldn't see that Elvis was creating something entirely new. The Grand Ole Opry wanted tradition. Elvis was the future. And that's why the rejection happened. Not because Elvis wasn't talented, not because his music wasn't good, but because he was so different, so revolutionary, that the establishment couldn't process what he was doing. They could only see what he wasn't. He wasn't traditional country. He wasn't pure blues. He wasn't gospel. They couldn't see what he was, the birth of rock and roll. So what happened to Elvis after he became famous? Did success heal that wound? Did proving everyone wrong finally make him feel like he was enough? Not exactly. Because here's the painful truth about chasing validation through success. It never fully works. Elvis became the biggest star in the world, but he never stopped feeling like that poor kid from Tupelo who got told he wasn't good enough. The fame, the money, the screaming fans, none of it could erase the fundamental insecurity that had been planted in him long before the Opry rejection. If anything, success made it worse, because now he had everything to lose. In the 1960s, after Elvis got out of the army and his movie career took over, he often talked about feeling trapped. Trapped by Colonel Parker's control. Trapped by Hollywood's formulaic movies. Trapped by the expectation to always be Elvis Presley, the icon, instead of just Elvis, the person. And underneath all that trapping was the old fear. What if they're right? What if I'm not good enough? What if this all goes away? That fear drove him to the 1968 comeback special, where he proved he could still electrify an audience. It drove him to Las Vegas in 1969, where he showed he could still command a stage. But it also drove him to the prescription pills, the isolation, the desperate attempts to control everything, because he could never quite shake the feeling that it could all be taken away in an instant. Just like Jim Denny had tried to take it away that night in 1954. The last time Elvis performed at the Grand Ole Opry, or rather, the last time he was invited, was never. The Opry never apologized. They never acknowledged their mistake. They never gave Elvis the platform he'd been denied that night in 1954. And you know what? Elvis didn't need them to. By the time he died in 1977, Elvis Presley had sold over 1 billion records worldwide. He'd changed the face of music, culture, and entertainment. He'd inspired generations of artists who came after him. He'd proven that you don't need the approval of the establishment to change the world. Sometimes the establishment is the last to recognize greatness because they're too busy protecting what already exists. So what's the real lesson here? Is it just another never give up motivational story? Is it just about perseverance and determination? No, it's deeper than that. The lesson is this: the people who reject you are often the people who are most threatened by you. Jim Denny didn't reject Elvis because Elvis lacked talent. He rejected Elvis because Elvis represented a future that made Denny's present obsolete. Elvis was the sound of young America, of post-war rebellion, of cultural revolution. The Grand Ole Opry was the sound of the past, and the past always fears the future. So when someone tells you that you're not good enough, that you'll never make it, that you should just give up and do something realistic, ask yourself, are they saying that because you actually lack potential, or are they saying it because you're doing something so new, so different, so threatening to their worldview that they can't comprehend it? Elvis Presley walked out of the Grand Ole Opry that night thinking he was a failure. But the real failure was the Opry's inability to recognize the future when it was standing right in front of them. And by the time they realized their mistake, Elvis had already conquered the world without them. That's the power of rejection. It doesn't define you. It reveals who's willing to see your potential and who's too limited by their own vision to recognize greatness. Elvis didn't need Jim Denny's approval. He needed an audience that was ready for something new. And he found it. In Memphis clubs, on radio stations, in the hearts of teenagers who were hungry for music that spoke to them, not to their parents. The Grand Ole Opry rejection almost killed Elvis's dream. Instead, it became the fuel that launched a revolution. And that's the story nobody tells about that night in 1954. The night Elvis Presley was told he'd never make it. The night he decided to prove them all wrong. The night that changed music history forever. Tell us in the comments, do you think their relationship was love or manipulation? Should there be age limits on relationships regardless of maturity? Can you ever truly recover from giving up your identity for someone else? Let us know what city you're watching from today. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional and untold stories of Elvis Presley, the human side of legends, and the relationships that shaped and scarred them. Hit the bell to never miss a story that matters.